republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning. Good morning.
Adams, Harris, Mayor,
here.
McDermott, here, McGella, here.
In our audience this morning, if I would like to address the committee. Okay, hearing none. Old business. We have approving funding for additional personnel for domestic violence courtroom. Mary and Greg. How are you on there?
Well, I guess I've asked the pleasure if there's any further information the committee is looking for. I thought that this was sent back to staff to determine whether funding was available.
Okay, and you got all the data that they needed.
I think we submitted that last month. We gave the estimates and everything. Yeah.
I guess we could talk about it now in committee. Is there a copy of that information available?
We could make a copy of this and distribute it. Melissa and I did have time to quickly discuss this. And our recommendation would be, since the positions aren't filled and they most likely wouldn't be filled for, we were estimating maybe August 1st, that it'd be funded out of contingency, cleaned up at year end, but set it at a dollar amount. We had the estimate for the full cost for the public defender and the state's attorney for the full year. So if we give them 4 months of each of those positions, what we wanted to stay away from is saying we'll clean up any shortfall you have.
Right.
So if we say we'll clean up a shortfall for the public defender's office, it's approximately $89,000 salary and benefits for 4 months, and for the state's attorney, it's about $72,000.
That's what I was wondering if we had those numbers. So roughly
about 161,000 between the two departments.
Okay. Now, did we need to approve an additional position?
I believe for the state's attorney.
Mr. Chairman, we need 2 ASAs, assistant state's attorneys, added to our count. We're at I apologize to you. We're at 64 right now, and we need to move to 66.
Okay.
I believe if we checked the last resolution, it gave you authority to go to the 66 already.
That's what I was wondering.
2012, yeah, in 2012, I believe it already authorized up to 66. So we'll give you the resolution and show that.
I just want to clarify. This is about the issue where we have the chief judge did some redistribution of court cases. There's no new judge. We just redistributed the court cases over to the one court. And we are, because of the way those distributions are, the workflow changed. And with the changing of the workflow, we're now having to double our staff in 3 different areas. Is that accurate?
It's close. Close, Chuck. The only additional thing I would say to that is that we used to have 6 felony courtrooms. Now we have, in the last 18 months, we've added 2, so now we have 8. So the other courtroom they actually stole from is more of a civil courtroom, and but what it means is you need the state's attorneys and the public defenders in those criminal courtrooms, and those felony courtrooms that have been added because of all the domestic violence cases. The idea there being is put all of those cases in one courtroom where you're going to have trained people at all levels, from the judge all the way down to staff, to be able to handle those cases in efforts where possible and where it should happen to try to maybe keep some families together. So, which is something that's you don't find so much in the other misdemeanor or other felony courtrooms. So we did add courtrooms, which is why there's been a further spread of staff.
So your number of cases, help me understand, Rich, your number of cases haven't really changed. Only the direction in which the cases are going. They're going to that courtroom because of the domestic battery and the training of those folks. And so now we're just, instead of having, and I'm just going to throw out a number just to hypothesis, a little hypothesis here. You got 100 cases out there that used to be distributed over 3 or 4 judges. They're now going to 1 for that domestic, and then the other cases are going out. So just help me
The
understand.
6 known felony judges, all the domestic violence cases are going to this judge, all the felony domestic violence cases. You're right, those are just spread to a different judge. The order of protection judge, I needed that person to do not only that work, but also some non-supportant attorney work, civil cases. I took all of those misdemeanor domestic violence cases and put them also with this new judge. So this new judge is getting, I don't know how many misdemeanor domestic violence cases there are. I'm going to guess in the area of a couple of hundred. I don't know if this state attorney's office.
100 a day, a week, a month?
At any one time, that goes through the call probably, he probably has between
100 cases, is that what you're saying?
We're thinking maybe, I know his call is maybe 40 or 50 cases a day, just misdemeanors, but you get some of the same cases either in a matter of days or in a matter of weeks on motions, pre-trials. You have emergency motions because you're trying to figure out how the victim and the children might be getting some money, because there might not be a divorce, or there might not have been a marriage to begin with. I can't tell you exactly how many cases there are pending at any one time, but I'm going to guess it's in the hundreds.
But, okay, so you have that courtroom staff, and you still have the same number of judges. I'm trying to understand why the other groups need to increase their numbers. You're not increasing your judges, you're just redistributing a workflow. So why do we have to go in and hire 2 new sheriffs and 2 new district attorneys, or state's attorneys, and defendants?
And I don't know if I mentioned this to last month's meeting, and I didn't say it now, and I apologize if I did not mention it, but I am asking for a new judge. I took one basically from the civil court, from the civil division, because I thought this court was important enough to start with the domestic violence. So I can handle things over in the civil division for the time being, but I am asking for a brand new judge. We have 19 associates. I'm asking for our 20th associate. I have a letter on my desk. I haven't sent it yet. I'm going to be sending it in the next week or 2, Chuck. And I can't tell you what the Supreme Court will do because that's their call. Although because we're 3 short now from the census from 2010, Will County, I have some expectation that will be listened to.
And where will this judge be placed?
Well, I'll probably put that judge back in the division I took Judge Mason from to go to domestic violence.
You have a quarter for them to go to, is my point.
Well,
Question.
no. I mean, if you want to give me a quorum somehow, that'd be great. But we need a Florida judge always that will handle emergencies or vacations, illnesses, and that's essentially what I'm trying to do there. We have branch court judges, and I'm moving from 1 branch court judge. It was 1 full-time call 2 years ago. Now it's about 2 3/4 calls with 2 judges. I'm moving that eventually to a full-time call because the branch courts have a large percentage of our total cases in the county, traffic cases and the local municipal ordinance violations, things like that. So it's hard because I'm juggling. There's always something in the air, but we don't have the space. But I'm doing what I can to be sure that without it, that as many people that come in to get their cases heard don't leave angry because they couldn't get a judge's time since they were too busy doing something else or couldn't get a court.
So when this judge comes in, if the Supreme Court gives you a new judge and they pay for a lot of that, so that's not a burden.
Benefits.
Right, that's not a burden on the county at this point. But then, will we then be asked to go in and supply staff for that? And if that's the case, why are we doing staff early before that judge has been hired?
I am not going to be coming back and asking you for staff for that judge, other than a bailiff, because we need to stay at a 1-to-1 ratio with judges and bailiffs. But other than that, I will not be coming to you asking for, again, for assistant prosecutors or for public defenders, because that judge would not be used for that purpose.
And Rich, is that your call, or that's the other guy's calls? That's the state's attorney's call, and that's the director of public defense and...
Judge, if I may, the standard call, the man number that we need in a given courtroom are 4 assistants, 3 first chair, second chair, and third chair, and then we have a drug unit assistant there. We do not need, in this particular case, a drug unit assistant. This is a domestic violence call. But it is a separate courtroom. It's a separate call that has to be manned. And when we have matters going on a very routine, regular basis, if there's a trial or 2 or 3 set, that has to be manned. We can't just pull a prosecutor out of another courtroom to try that case because he doesn't really know anything about it. It's been worked out by this one group in this courtroom. They know it, and that's the ideal way of handling it and the proper way of handling it. So even though it may seem as if you're creating a courtroom with only existing files out there, that's not really with all due respect, it's not really the emphasis.
Do you guys have a workflow chart on all this stuff?
You better be happy to.
I'd love to see that, to be able to get a visual of this, to sit here and just kind of talk about it and not really see where things are going, especially, this whole, because for years we've talked about when we get new judges, we have to go and hire these people. Mm-hmm. All right, now we're saying let's hire these people before we even get a new judge. Well, we have same number of cases. Caseload hasn't really increased that much, I don't think. I've not heard that that's been the case. That we've had increased caseloads and all that to where the workflow has changed, unless I'm missing something.
I'm sorry. I haven't come to you asking for staffing in the last year and a half. And I know you're mentioning that the judges have not increased. We have. We've gone from 33 to 34 to 35 judges in the last less than 24 months. Judge Kinney asked for and received a census judge, a new associate, in 2012. I asked for and received a new census associate judge in 2013. Both were assimilated into our courtrooms without coming to you for help. I did the same thing in January 1st of 2013. I started the overflow felony courtroom. I did that so I didn't have to come to you, because in that overflow courtroom, the files would come from other judges along with the lawyers that were in those courtrooms. But now it's grown to the point that I have to come to you asking for staffing, because we have grown from 6 to 7 to 8 felony courtrooms, and now we're asking for a 3rd census judge in less than 24 months. So it's my apologies for not, I didn't know if you were assuming that or not, but we have added judges without asking for extra staff. Another point I would like to make too is that one reason why I'm adding to the criminal division is because there's a whole lot of custodies that are sitting over in your jail that the county's paying for, and the quicker we get to those custodies, the quicker they either get moved on to the Department of Corrections, or they get moved on to a drug treatment program, or they get moved into probation where they're no longer a burden on the county. And I think that has been somewhat successful and will continue to be as we move forward. But we're certainly limited by our space. And that's a real problem in trying to figure out which courtroom should get most of the cases. But those custodies need to be addressed. And that's one reason why I'm in the process of doing what I've done.
I want to make a comment about staffing and funding. They're 2 different things. Quite frankly, you can hire whoever you want. We don't determine your staffing. State's attorney, a little different situation. We have to approve the number of assistant state's attorneys they can employ. So that's a little different. So I hate to see this board get bogged down on discussions of staffing, workflow. That's not what we do. That's up to chief judge, state's attorney, whoever has oversight. We're about funding. Even if the personnel committee made a determination that it's the staff is needed, it doesn't mean the finance committee gives more money. I mean, there's, it may allow some additional appropriation, but it doesn't mean it's 100%. It doesn't mean that some things some areas cannot be within their own agencies reappropriated and so forth. So, I really, if you want to have a discussion on staffing, that's one thing. But this is a budget process for us. This is an appropriation process. I'd rather kind of cut through it and say, what are you talking about money? What additional funding do you think you need? And quite frankly, I don't necessarily, as a board member, I don't necessarily want to say, well, bailiff is $20,000 a year, and the secretary is $30,000 a year. That's not what I'm looking for. I mean, I want to say, you're going to manage your areas, and it's just not going to be, from my perspective, it's just not, we're just going to add in appropriation. So I think that whether it's the state's attorney or the judiciary, you need to come back and say, we need X amount of dollars. We think we need X amount of dollars. And I'm not going to argue staffing with you. If you say you need it, okay. But understand that you might have to take money from somewhere else in your budget. So I just want to make that point. Because the staffing doesn't justify, because if you want to justify the staffing and then believe that that justifies 100% additional appropriation for all that staffing, it won't. So I just want to make that point. Both chairs, the personnel chair and the finance chair, regardless of personnel feels that additional staffing is needed, it doesn't mean that we appropriate 100% of what they need. They're going to have to go back in their budget and see whether they're going to be able to perhaps get additional funding to put towards this new staffing, how they're going to reappropriate money within their departments and agencies, and then come back with a number.
I think the first part of the question was, were the number of positions being approved already, and it sounds like we've already given you the extra 2 spots.
But see, even if they were approved, see, this is where I think we run into, I don't want to say trouble, but it's where there gets to be a breakdown of communication. Staffing, if say we allow up to 64 assistant state's attorneys, doesn't mean you necessarily appropriate all the money. I mean, one doesn't commit you, staffing doesn't commit you to funding necessarily, is what I'm saying. You have to look at the overall budget and see how it can be utilized to support that staffing. Look, if you need more assistant state's attorneys, well, maybe you're going to have to, and I don't want to pick on the state's attorney's office. It's easy. Well, means you might have to have one less support person. Maybe some of that money's going to have to come in. Maybe, like I said, maybe it means the assistants, they have to do a little more of their own paperwork or whatever. I don't know. All I'm saying is, it's just not, just because we approve assistant state's attorneys doesn't mean that we approve that additional money.
I know.
That's the point I make. And very often, since I've been here, well, we're okay staffing. Well, then the assumption is you've approved the appropriation, additional appropriation. I want to just make it clear that's not the case.
Right.
And this is not to interrupt him, but this case in point, I was wrong. We already have the 66. Mary checked it real fast. There was Mr. Busey had recommended 2 years ago that we make it 66. I didn't pick up on that. I do apologize. But that's a prime example that we have not funded for those. You have not funded for those. We have not hired them. And we wouldn't. But anyway, so we're just looking for funding at this point.
Mary, did you have anything?
Yeah, I don't, in view of Mr. Musis's comments, I don't know, I was just going to indicate to Mr. Mayor that we do provide a flow chart every year with our budget request, and we, have updated that, and we will be submitting it with our budget request this year. And with regard to the future courtroom that the Chief Judge was speaking of, he was speaking of a civil courtroom, so those are not manned by public defenders or prosecutors.
And if I may, apologize. If I may, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that the Chief Judge indicated was very important in this process. So it's not, again, just about numbers. It's about programs and so on. We're really putting emphasis on the issues of domestic violence, rightfully so, and trying to save the families if we can. There's a lot more time and effort put into those rather than just trying the case or cleaning the case out and see you later. It's a lot more effort. So it's not just a numbers thing. It's kind of like what the philosophy is as well. And just one further footnote. Normally when a new courtroom is created, we would need those 4 assistants. We're not here asking for 4. We're basically here asking to fund 2 because we're taking some from other places to fill that need. So if it were a traditional kind of courtroom where it was just a brand new scenario, but we're not already handling them, we'd be in here asking funding of 4 assistants. We're not doing that.
I would just offer my 2 cents in this. We've been talking in various committees over the last several years about the number of judges and acquiring space, accommodating space, and just to I want to make sure we're all on the same pages. There were 5 census judges that were basically accounted for. I guess you can't say they're not authorized, but 5 to Will County based on our population. 2 of those have been approved and are on staff. The judge was talking about the 3rd, so that would get us to 3 of the 5. So we have 2 judges that we're eligible for. We haven't requested, the Chief Judge hasn't requested, nor have we received those. But historically, we've talked about the staffing of judges because depending on the type of courtroom, criminal versus civil, you have a different complement of the staff. And I think we can't not acknowledge that because that is a cost, and you can't have a judge without the appropriate staff to run those courtrooms. And the other disconnect, I think, we have to make sure there's a connection between when we're building courtrooms, whether it be in the small one that's on the first floor, or if we build any additional courtrooms, the board needs to know about that because if those were done by PBC, but if PBC is authorizing construction of courtrooms, then the board should be planning in their budget process for the staffing of those courtrooms. Because I think that's what's happening here is some of this is a product of we added 1 courtroom on the first floor. We're adding an additional judge to the road, I believe, to help with the movement of cases. That has a cost. And the last thing I think important point to restate is the judge's point about having additional criminal courtrooms moves defendants who are in the ADF possibly along so that we're maintaining appropriate staff level because there may be a savings that we're not really counting in getting those people out of our jail is possibly impacting overtime and just other related ADF costs. And other counties do look at that and say, how do we move these cases along, particularly the ones that are nonviolent offenders and things that can be moved into drug programs. There may be a savings to spending the dollars to staff those courtrooms to move these cases along. I don't know the county has ever really looked at that too much because it is kind of in the weeds, but at the end of the day, you're approving a budget that's going to pay for those things, and that should impact your decision. I know we'll look at that as far as if there's an investment in additional staff that moves cases out of the ADF.
It would be easy to calculate that if we could figure out how many less people are going to have to be incarcerated while they wait for trial because we have judges, and then we can check and see how much we can save versus how much the additional costs are. So, but we're not really doing that here. It should move them along maybe a little bit, but I think once the courthouse is built and we actually have 3 or 4 new judges, then we'll be able to tell them better. I think, Jackie, you have some comments?
I just wanted to make the comment. I mean, I had sent the Chief Judge, I think, a spreadsheet, a matrix of what they did in New Hampshire a couple years ago, but I sent it last year. how they were able to move cases through faster and how much money it actually saved. I mean, there are projects out there that people are working on, that if you get people through the courtroom faster, it saves more money.
Sure.
So, are we looking at a midterm budget change here? Well, just to Mr. Muse's point, I mean, if we're talking about allocating dollars and not necessarily setting up and approving hires, which I agree with, I mean, to go in here and spend a whole lot of time figuring out whether we're going to pay every, all the dollars for 2 hires or 3 or 4 hires, depending on what the number is that each one of them need, or are we going to just we're looking at a midterm budget change, and that's not something this committee has historically done. So I
think what we've done in the past.
So I'm asking the question.
Just my own recollection of how we've dealt with these kind of situations in the past is now somebody has come midterm and they've had a purpose for some additional staffing, some additional costs. What the finance committee has said, and what I'm probably going to say right now, is you need to try to work with your own budget. And if we realize that the cost is somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000 for what you're planning on doing between all the departments, we're not going to guarantee we're going to be able to fund that completely at the end of the year, but we will keep that in mind, and if need be, we'll try to reserve as much of that as we can in this line.
Do we need to know what that money is?
Bruce?
Yeah, I don't want to miss the opportunity to again say that so long as we continue to prepare budgets on an annual basis and not take a long review, so there's an expectation by our elected officials as to where we expect them to be, and we understand what their problems are, we are going to repeat these discussions year after year after year.
Yes.
We're fortunate to have Rashawn on board now, and so hopefully this is going to change. But this problem will persist so long as we continue doing our budgets the way we do.
I agree 100%. There's going to be more and more departments that are going to be forced to have these midterm kind of conversations. So, Chief?
Just a brief comment on Mike and Steve. My credibility with this county board is very, very important to me. I do not want you thinking that I'm coming to you asking for something that I don't need. In fact, I don't know that there's been any chief judge since I've been a circuit for 12 years that's ever gone over budget. And I think that we've tried hard to work within our means. And I understand your policies that you don't like to make midterm changes. It can be a difficult precedent to set, I suppose. But and if you say that we have to wait until December 1st, we work over there. We're not going to fall apart if we don't get these spots. We're going to keep working, and we're going to keep working hard. But I just think that for the citizens of the county and for all the good that this extra staff could do in these courtrooms, I think it is important, and that's why I'm here asking.
No, Chief, I'm not saying that you shouldn't hire what you need to hire to run your shop. Because I can't tell you how to run your shop. What I'm saying is that if you don't have the funds at the end of the year, you will try to find the funds in contingency. But I'm not going to increase your line items at this point in time.
I appreciate that.
But I do thank you for coming in and telling us about it now, so that we can plan accordingly with what we have in our contingency and our cash reserves. If that makes any sense, I hope. Jim?
Well, I was going to also reinforce a little bit what Mr. Wilhelm was saying. And you need to try to get through this budget year and find ways to fund this for this budget year, and then we will address it in the upcoming budget. That would be much better. That's the normal process. That process does work much better. And we do, at the end of the year, try to address shortfalls if they're there. We encourage you not to have any shortfalls. We clean up the budget at the end, and we shift a little money around, and we see where there's money left, and so forth. And normally it has worked pretty well, and we've stayed within our overall appropriations doing that.
And this heads up is going to be helpful with the budgeting process, because now we do realize we're going to have this additional cost to worry about in next year's budget.
Correct.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may follow up, we would concur totally with the Chief Judge that we are going to man that courtroom. We're short in other areas, and as I said last month, we're going to do our job, and that courtroom's going to be manned. So regardless of what, and we respect what the community needs to do, and we will work within those parameters.
Thank you very much. And I do respect all of the work that you guys do. It's not easy working within the constraints that you have. And as with most of our departments, we've had a difficult time funding what I feel everybody needs to have in the budget, but brighter days hopefully are in our future. Thank you. Anything else?
Okay, moving on, we have no other old business. There is no new business under this joint committee, and I need a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Okay. So we, number 9.
Order findings.
Yes. So do we need to take a roll then? Okay.
Adamick, Garrett, Mayor,
Yes.
Dermott, Dalla,
Yes.
Kinnear,
Yes.
Winfrey, here, me also, Eustace and DeGrosse.
Thank you very much. We're here, any old business, I don't believe we have any comments from the public? All right, new business, discussion of House Bill 105 and ramifications to 2014 budget and future elections. Nancy.
Want me to come down? Can everybody hear me?
Sure, that'd be great.
Basically, I'm here not to ask for anything, I'm basically to educate you on House Bill 105. Because this was thrown in at the end of the session, pretty much so. There was no planning.
Yeah, I've never heard this one.
Yeah, there was no planning or discussion, and all of us worked very closely with our lobbyist, and how I was here in the past about the polling places. But now this law is really going to affect my early voting sites. Right now, just for clarification for everybody, I have 23 early voting sites, and the township has it up in Frankfurt. And basically, they're a temporary permanent polling place. So they could set their hours the way they want to work. If they want to work weekends, they can work from 10 to 2. But my office is a permanent polling place. So I have, for early voting, I have to be open the hours that were restricted by law statute. So now what they're doing, and we have to be open on, and I don't have no problem with this in my office, because my staff is there to do it. And we work Saturdays, Sundays, but now this new bill, House Bill 105, we have to have 3 permanent polling places at our largest municipalities. So right now, it affects 3 of my sites: Joliet, City of Joliet, Village of Bolingbrook, and City of Naperville. So Village of Bolingbrook I don't have a problem with, because I worked with Carol Penny and the mayor, and they already are one of my early voting sites. So I have the equipment out there. Same for the City of Naperville. But the City of Joliet right now, it's right here in my building. So now we have to have another permanent, and I worked very closely with Phil Mock, the state's attorney, because I was trying to find a way that with this bill, because we're right here in Joliet, but we have, it is, but I have to have another one. We have to have 2. So I went out and visited the Joliet Park District last week, and they're going to let me use their facility with no charge, because they shouldn't charge me anywhere, because they're a unit of government. So, but we have to staff these places now. And so the Village of Bolingbrook, they're going to have to be working on Saturdays and Sundays. And another law that they passed is that we have to be open on election day here too. So people are voting throughout at their polling place, but now they can come here in my office and at these 3 sites. So they have to also know how to do grace period. And everybody knows what grace period voting is. Say the last day to register to vote was October 5th. Grace period was October 6th to the Saturday before the election, which was a good law, but the only place they were able to do that was in my office, downstairs. And so my early voting sites, all they were able to do when they were in my database is view. But now these permanent polling places, like the City of Joliet and the Village of Bolingbrook, they're going to have to know how to take a voter registration, change it, put it in the system, and also give them a ballot. And they have to be open on election day too. So my concern is training the staff so they know how to put the people in the system, and to have people there working those hours, because I'm mandated by law that I have to do this.
So I'm here just to educate you on grace period. And the thing that's upsetting to me the mostly about this bill, it only pertains to this election. So in 2015, I'm asking the Park District to use their building right now, but in 2015, when their park board members and their school board members and everybody else is up for election, we don't need them then, but we only need them for this election. I have a feeling that this is going to happen again in 2016, but I think it's even going to grow further. And the only reason that's saving me right now is we use those DS200s, the early voting sites, and I have an extra one here for the city of Joliet, and we had grant money to purchase that equipment, but there's no grants out there, there's no funding with this, and I've been working with Karen and Sean too. It was nice meeting you at hearing, but I said, I'm just worried about this year. And I know that it's up to us to find staff, but I have to get some people trained for those 2 weeks. And who do you hire for 2 weeks just to be educated on how, knows how to enter people in the system, give out the right ballots, and deal with technology? So I'm figuring it all out, but I just thought it was important for board members to know what House Bill 105 is all about. And another thing that's out there too, early voting. In the past, at one of my sites, the 23 in here, you had to show a government ID. Now they did away with that that you don't have to show it, just for this election too. So once again, how do you educate our community with all these changes that's just going to pertain to this election? So.
Is it just this election, or is it actually
the bill says
even numbered election?
It's the even number year, so it's only this election.
But it sounded like it was all even number years.
Yeah, and then it's going to be 2016, but 2015. But you know what's going to happen is they're going to say, now we want more permanent polling places.
Probably.
So that you're talking about equipment, and we have great technology out there. And I heard Margot too in Frankfurt, and we got them some because they were using their staff time, and they have other responsibilities at their townships and villages that they have to do. And we worked closely to get machines out there, and they're able to print ballot on demand out there now. In the past, we had to print all those ballots. The voter used to put their ballot in an envelope. Now it prints the application and the ballot, and the voter's able to put their ballot right in the scanner. And the only reason they're able to do that is because the DS200 got certified in the last summer. So, yes.
I just want to ask, why Naperville? I mean, I get, part of it is obviously in Will County, but does it count the whole population?
Yes, we had to work with the census, so those were my 3 top ones.
It seems, I don't know what the population is on the Will County side.
60,000.
Is it,
And they got to work, because I'm working with Bob Starr too in DuPage County, because that's affects the city of Naperville also.
So are they going to have somebody on the DuPage County side?
But that's what we're going to try to work it out. We're splitting costs. But I did talk to Carol Penning. Carol Penning did ask the mayor if we could use the building, and he said fine with it. But he said we had to staff them. So, and it's not fair to the early voting sites, my temporary ones, like out Frankfurt too, they use their staff, but these sites, they have to work all those hours, and Saturdays and Sundays, and we have to be there, on Sundays, we have to be there till 7 at night. So it's not like we close at 4:30, it's 7 at night. And on 6 in the morning on Easter, on the election day, all the way to 7 o'clock. And the sad thing about it here also is if you're one of those, if you're voting on the weekends like that, you have to become those grace period also have to be a provisional ballot too. So that means their vote's still in question, if they're a provisional ballot. So there's a lot of training that's going on with my out at these sites. So it's the 3 sites that is affected. I'm just here to give you an education because I know all of us, that's what we do, worry about elections. Yes. So, any questions? If anybody would like, I didn't want to waste all the paper. If anybody would like a copy of the House Bill 105, I would be glad to print some for you. But if you have any further questions, and I did work with the finance department, and I'm trying to educate everybody so there's no surprises because it's this year's budget I'm worried about. So. Thank you for your time.
Okay, moving on. Request to place auditors quarterly on file. Okay, Bucky here. So, come on up.
Do we have somebody who can turn off that set of lights?
Yeah, we're going to take a look at his new financial
Is that okay?
Moved and seconded to place the auditor's report on file. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, now we can move on.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rowan and Mr. Jester. I got a lot of them here. All right. Thank you, projector. We get it right.
It's not on.
All right. I'm introducing the new website and also the checkpoint, the checkbook Will County 2.0, which is an exciting thing. But this information is part of what wins us the award every year for top transparency sites over the nation. And I'm going to go into the first one. This is the new way that you'll be able to view the checkbook. Tell me if I need to zoom in on this.
Yeah.
Okay, this is also formatted for your iPad device. This is also formatted for your iPad devices. So I try to keep the constraints of the viewing area pixels to fit an iPad. So if you guys have your iPads in front of you, you guys can log in to willcountyauditor.com. If you can view it on the site, you can also view the direct link to these reports as well. But on the top, this is the checkbook. This contains 5 years of data, so it starts with 2008 and goes through 2014. We were just given a rather large FOIA by Adam Andrzejewski. Hopefully I got the name right.
That's right.
Right, so we go to Illinois. He sent out a new round of FOIAs asking for information on municipal and local government checkbooks. Well, ours is already available online. We've included this, and we've talked to Adam, and he appreciates this site. He's growing his database as it is, but here it's viewable locally here. So this is showing just 2014. You can filter all these choices: fund, office, subdepartment, and account description. And then if you hover your mouse over this little red blue dot, it says click, or hover over this on your iPads, you would be clicking, because you can't magically hover your finger over it. But it will show you the information, and it sort of gives a small instructional tip. And what's helpful here is that all this data is residing on the cloud now, so whatever information there is here, viewable, you can easily download it as an Excel or a PDF. So in here, if you mouse over or click one of these items, you'll receive extra information. The description on the purchase, the account description, so this is for computer supplies. It says corporate fund, county executive, liquor commission. You also see if it's a pro card purchase or not, and you'll see the vendor right here. And then you also see the check date and the amount. You can swiftly go through here if you want to look at anything from, I don't know, county motor fuel. You can go down and just pick county motor fuel, and it will update, and you'll see all county motor fuel. You can go back and say, I would like to see all of them, and just see the information just for, if you would like to go back and review what the county clerk was just talking about, and here's county clerk. You can see, look at some of her purchases and the expenses that she is using in the last, again, 5 years. You can also drill down into her county clerk elections committee. Here's county clerk's elections. So then you can also see what she's actually appropriating directly to the elections. There's more information beyond that. So if you go to this Open Gov Center, you'll see this is the county checkbook. Below it is the annual expenses. So this is going to be available again. This is made available to the public, to officials, and to management. You can see the county sheriff. Again, you can filter by, this is available to filter by fund type, by funds. So you can go into funds, you can look at, RTA is usually a focus of everyone's. Now, this is just expenses. It's described under the county board, so you can see this, but you can see the account description of the expenses. The 2014 is budget. So anytime you see this, you will see this in the helpful tool here. It will say the current year expense budget in the last 5 years, actual annual expenses. Again, below it is a table. It's a summary and detail of all the information seen in this view. If you want to go back to just the corporate fund, I'll show you real quick. You can also then go into county executive, where you can see, how about the sheriff? So you can see the sheriff. And this is year over year as well. If you hover again or click this, you'll see the percentage change from the prior year. And this is 2% is going up. 5% is going up from 2012 to 2013 for corporate fund, county sheriff. And then where you're at for a percentage change of your budget, the actual. Now, there's more information you can go in here, so you can see the fund analysis. You can see all these. Again, popular thing to look at is the RTA. And this is interesting. If you're looking at RTA, Steve, and I know Jackie and Jim have reviewed this often, Chuck as well, really everyone here. If you go into RTA, you will be able to see where the years and where it's at. This is, again, right here is budget. And then you can see this is actual cash amount. And this was updated yesterday morning. It can be updated as quickly as possible. But what we're using is a connection directly from our accounting system. And I believe strongly that as this county, as we develop our reporting information, this right now in the interim is one of the most powerful tools we're going to probably be seeing. There's also, I'll show you something that, this is again, something that you guys have directly asked for. Now you had asked me several months back to give some analysis on salary and budget. If you recall, about 4 years ago, I showed a gauge. It was like a round gauge that was sort of visualization of salaries and how much was spent. These are what's called bullet charts. They're an actual gauge, but it's just flattened and then laid upon each other, which is a much better use of space. You guys can visually see it a little bit better. But if you go here, you can drill down into specific county offices as well. So it's separated by offices here, and then there's sub-departments. This is actual county data, again, coming from our corporate fund. This blue bar is the current year-to-date bar. This little mark was last year as of June, the end of June. So this is just end of June yesterday, from last year compared to this year. This little small mark is 58.4%. That is 7 months out of 12. So that is the projection of the budget. Any budget that is over, based on that projection, will be shown in purple and have a little over budget. Again, if you want more information on this chart, you can go in here and see over budget, and it explains that. Yes?
Purple. Does it turn purple once they get over budget, or does it, because I can't tell, it looks sort of like it started out purple.
It will show that it's just highlighted purple if that particular office or sub-department is over budget, so based on the projection of 7 over 12 months.
Got it. Okay.
Again, at the bottom, all these charts include the summary and detail in tables. And the last one, which is described as cute by somebody, and our treasurer, Steve Weber, thinks it's cute. And my auditor as well. This is personnel compensation analysis. This is based off of last year's. Now, there is a public act showing that we have to show our salaries, and the executive's office has been showing this. This is just our visualization of that. This is the departments. This is the sheriff showing what theirs is. And you can see this broken out as well by job classification description. So this is sheriff deputy. Below the largest orange is correctional officer. And this is the number. So you can see, this is 60 million. This is a number. The distinct count of employees by department. And let me get back to that. Come back to how much? Sorry, dude. Let me just read. It was drilled down and we don't want to drill down. All right, here's the cute little thing. Now this is word maps. You probably have seen them maybe on a Wall Street Journal or something like that. But this is actual relative size based on the data and the compensation size of dollars by the names of jobs, classifications, and position. So this is cute.
Oh, so it fits the size of the fund based on the salary that we pay.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. I was wearing a shirt yesterday with that domestic violence.
And then this is data, this is detailed summary of all departments as well by employee number, so individual. And you can also go along the line. Each one of these has health insurance down to retirement, down to mileage reimbursement. And so hopefully this will allow better visualization of our accounting data. And as we work together to develop the reporting systems that hopefully transform our decision making, this will be a part of it. And just to show you how open this actually is, on this main page, there's also the old information that was on the open government stuff that fulfills the criteria of open government foundations that give us awards for tax and budget and videos and such, our lobbyists, our salaries, our contracts, our elected officials. This little section talks about how open government requires open data. So this information is directly, it's ETL, so it's extract, transform, and load right into this accounting data. So this is actually from our accounting system. And just to show you how open this is, it can be all downloaded. So this whole data set from our accounting system can completely be downloaded. And then if you want to download the actual accounting software that is being used, you can also, I mean, this is bean counter heaven. I don't expect anybody to do that.
Are you saying that the public has the ability to download all this?
The data plus the software.
Okay, and then the data that's related to individual personnel line items?
That's the extract, transform, and load. The transform is the filtering process that takes out. So none of the confidential private information, that has been filtered out.
Except those code numbers relate to a person.
That does relate to a person.
And is that their actual ID number, or is that a self-generated code by the system?
That's their actual, that's our convention for our employee number.
So it's not their employee number?
It is, yes, it is.
The whole thing is their employee number?
Yes. So you can identify these people.
So my point, from a state's attorney's standpoint, should we be putting out employee ID numbers? I'm all about, having the elected officials be able to see all this stuff, but with the FERPA laws and, all the other security laws, to put out an employee's ID number that then has all that other information aligned to it.
With regard to our compensation, is that what you're talking
No,
about?
in regards to our open, all this information being out there on an individual employee with an employee ID number as the identifier that still identifies who that employee is, and if that number is somehow...
Well, the concern that I would have is what do we use that ID number for? I do know that, I believe we use that number for our health information.
Yep.
So I don't know if that then...
So I'm really not wanting to see that stuff out on the public. I mean, there is, I think that needs to be behind a secure website.
Well, certainly the everything is public information that's out there. So certainly the salaries and the compensation, not only is that public information, but for many of your employees, we're required to have that on the website.
And as a reference,
the question is whether or not the employee ID is a proper identification. for.
The system generates its own self-generating number, and I don't know if it has that ability to do that. Extract the employee ID number, put in a self-developed number, so that there is no way to link that. I'm okay with that. But in the current process right now, I think we're
Can you just substitute the name in?
We can substitute the name in. Right now, as a reference, this is the Public Act of 097-0609, which the county executive has fulfilled by showing actual ID names. So we can do names.
I think that's less troubling only because the employee number is used for a variety of perhaps private personal information. And I don't know, I mean, typically there are passwords also with that, but once you give out one, the other may be.
I don't think you could actually get anything out of just the employee number.
Well, I mean, but similarly, you don't usually get anything out of a person's birthday, but it's one step in stealing a person's identity.
That's exactly
right. And similarly, I would have to ask for more information from the executive's office as to how we utilize that employee identification number. I do know that we use it for our health assessment that we now take as part of the wellness program. We have to type our employee number, so now anybody who maybe wanted to try to break into that database, they have half the component to do it. That I think is the issue.
I just wanted to make a point too, when we were complying with that public act, we did not disclose any information about health insurance. We have a blanket statement up there that says because we're self-insured, there's nothing linked to an employee, because based on our previous employee contribution plan, you could tell what kind of coverage they had, which opens the door to other information.
Yeah, and our intention is to fully maintain the confidentiality and keep security as well.
Of that question, could you work with?
We will definitely work on that. That is absolutely the most important, is to maintain the security of that. It can be easily switched. Again, it can be transformed.
All right, well, thank you for this demonstration. I'm going to go home and play with it tonight. I know that. I'm not sure about anybody else, but I think this is fantastic to get to the information that anybody would want to have about our county finances. Moving on, number 3, awarding bid for demolition of 21-411.
Got it.
I think that's a pretty good. So moved.
Thank you. Second.
Moved and second. All in favor? Opposed?
They all list the names of the...
Appropriation for this, so we're at the backup system. Mike Castelli can come in.
Yes, we have an opportunity to receive some money from the state to enhance our data backup disaster recovery solution. We have requested those funds from, I believe, the state senate. And if we receive those, then we will obviously need an appropriation to be able to expend those funds.
So you just let us know ahead of time that you may get the funds, or?
Sorry?
Are you just letting us know ahead of time that you may get the funds, or?
Yes. Is this a matching grant, Mike?
I'm sorry?
Is this a matching grant where we need to come up with the money for it?
We are not aware of the details of that.
Yeah.
We were told there was an opportunity to go after some money, and to pass it up would be crazy. So,
my understanding is one of our state senators, Donnie Trotter, somehow, I don't know, it's not an earmark or anything like that, but there are some funds that they thought they could make available to the county, so Mike, in consulting with other staff, identified this that was in our technology plan. Obviously, data backup's an important piece, so we put the request in, but for the board process, if we can move this forward, if we can get all the details and the specific dollar amounts and things before the board meeting, I would ask that you keep this alive to that point. If we don't have that information by the board meeting or by the second executive committee, we could potentially pull it back and bring it back in August. But just to keep this moving,
we're asking appropriate now in anticipation of the grant?
Well, I guess, just to be fair to the board, without the actual paperwork or I want you to trust us, but don't give us the appropriation until we have the document. So, to be fair to you, keep the process going. If we don't have the actual document, you're not appropriating anything until we have that. But if we can move it this month, I guess, we'd like to. If we have to wait till next month.
That's fine. We can make a motion.
So I'd make a motion that to appropriate the disaster grant recovery system, if acquired by the state, within the next month.
I think we're receiving a grant.
100% funded by the state. Is that what we're anticipating?
That's what we're anticipating.
Okay.
We've asked for 100%.
So if there's matching, you would come back.
Motion by Mayor, second by Adamick. Any questions? Everybody understand what we did?
So the resolution is going to be appropriating grant funds pending receipt of 100% of the grant funds from the state.
So my understanding is if we don't receive it, then the resolution doesn't go, it doesn't apply. You can pass the resolution as stated, but we can't, we don't have the appropriation authority until we pull the resolution. Right, okay.
Right.
Hopefully we're going to have it, we don't have an exact expectation of when it's going to show up, but we just want to keep things moving, but I
We'll know more by next week when we set the agenda too.
By chance you get it before the board meeting, this way you can get it bought before, so you don't have to wait till August. That's fine. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Monthly update on county taxes. This would be a good time to make a turn and introduce.
Yes, and I apologize for not doing the beginning of the meeting. Our new budget director started on June 23rd, Rashawn Howard. We already have her doing budget meetings, and this is her first set of committee meetings, and we're thrilled she's here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've been looking very much forward to working with you.
Yes. You know what, likewise.
Would it be appropriate to ever just give us a little brief introduction?
That's a good idea. Yeah, could you give us that, don't read your resume, but just give us a little bit of what you've done.
Who are you? Okay, sure.
Do you have a job?
Just a brief background of myself. I come from the finance and accounting background with over 15 years experience. My most recent role, I was a business consultant working with Exelon in their finance department, specifically in their strategy and planning area. And we coordinated the business planning process and financial reporting for the organization. And we were responsible for multi-year business planning. And I'm excited to be here and work with all of you and head up this annual budget process and work on capital projects. I think this is an exciting time for Will County, and I'm proud to be a part of that. And I hope to bring some great ideas and best practices here, and working with Karen, Nick, and most of you.
Thank you very much. And the multi-year experience that you had at Exxon will come in handy here because, as you know, we want to adopt that kind of same policy for not just the capital requirements, but also our regular finances. So.
Yes.
It sounds like you have good experience to help us get through that.
Yes, sir.
All right, Karen, let you lead this next.
Okay, this report is through May 31st, which is 6 months or halfway through our fiscal year. If you take a look at the charts on page 1, this is just a quick snapshot of where we are, revenue and expense, including, my estimate for accruals. The top chart is for revenue. Our largest revenue sources are property taxes. We received our first distribution in May. It was approximately $17 million, which is about 25% of what we would expect to collect during the year also. Intergovernmental revenues, $24 million, or roughly 35% of our year-to-date revenue. Charges for service, which is our fees, $14 million, which is about 20% of our year-to-date revenue, and then $11 million is the other category, and that is the transfer in from FICA and IMRF to cover those benefit costs in the corporate fund. The chart at the bottom is the expenses. As is typical, the salaries and fringes are the largest portion, $69 million, or 84% of our year-to-date expenses, followed up by supplies and professional and technical services. Each of those are approximately $4 million, or 5% of our year-to-date expenses. On page 2, we have a 25-month look at our corporate cash balance. We ended the month of May with $39.4 million, slightly above the prior year. We would expect that the cash balance to continue to increase. It's usually at its highest right around August and September when we get the second half of the real estate distributions. Page 3 is a recap of revenue and expenditures by category. This page also shows the budget adopted and amended, actual, my estimates for accruals, and then some comparisons. Neither revenue nor expense are showing anything unusual. The revenue's coming in as expected. We're spending money as we would expect. The revenue was slightly lower than the prior year. At the end of May, it's low by 1.2 million. Last month it was a little bit higher, so I think those are just timing differences. On the expense side, the expenses are slightly higher, 1.4 million. Again, that could be due to timing, and we also have the increased wage costs this year. If you go to page 4 and 5, this is revenue by category with a little bit more information on the major revenue lines within those categories. This does not list every revenue line we get. We have hundreds of them. So these are just the primary ones. I mentioned earlier that the tax levy, we received our first distribution of 17 million. We received a distribution beginning of June that was 15 million. Combined, that's 50% of our tax levy in the corporate fund, or 32 million. So we're right on target there. Overall revenue is a little bit lower than the prior year. There don't seem to be any negative trends. I do believe most of it is due to timing. In the intergovernmental category, all the state, the sales tax, the local use tax, the supplementary tax, those delays in receipt are the normal process, which is about 2 months. And that's what my accrual would represent. And finally, we have page 6 and 7, which is our look at expenditures. Page 6 is all expenses by department combined. There's a year-to-date actual, my estimate for accrual, and then your comparison to the prior year. We would expect at this point in the year to have expended 50% of our budget if everything was uniform every month, which obviously it's not. There's a handful of departments that are over the 50%. They have a red box around the percent spent to date. Quickly, I can talk about those. The Liquor Commission has a whopping budget of $650. They seldom spend money. They upgraded some computer equipment this year. They spent more than half their budget at $335, I think. Records Management is over the 50%. They did expend their entire capital budget already. They made a purchase of some new printers and copiers. They just spent it all at one point in the year rather than throughout the year. Probation, I believe they're inching up over what we would expect due to wage increases from contract settlements. Their budgets were not amended for the contract settlements that continued to happen into 14. And finally, the sheriff is over 2% from where we would expect. A major portion of that would be salaries. They're also over in supplies, lab services, property services, and capital. Capital, not an issue. They just spent their capital grant all at one time. Lab services, they pay their annual fee up front at the beginning of the year instead of stretching it over the months. And then the supplies and the property services are mostly computer supplies and equipment maintenance and repairs. And then finally, the last page looks at the expenses a little bit differently. It separates salaries and benefits from all the other expenditures. Typically, you see the same departments. If we look again, Liquor Commission shows up that they're over only on the other expenditure side. Records management is over only on the other expenditure side. Here PCC is showing over budget just on the salary side. There's only one employee in there, so I think that's probably a calculation error. The maintenance department is showing a little bit over in the salary side, probation, and again, the sheriff.
Anybody have any questions on the information? Questions? Jackie?
She said the overage in the sheriff's department under probation. Is it any particular that would be under probation? What does that budget category entail?
I'm sorry.
Probation. What is that? What is that?
Adult and juvenile detention.
It's the facilities. It's not actually.
No, it has nothing to do with the sheriff. It has nothing to do with it. That's part of the judicial. So those are probation officers. And they have 4 or 5 different labor contracts that apply to their staff. Their labor negotiations continue past when their budget was developed. So I think that's probably why they're starting to creep up a little bit. But they don't have anything to do with the sheriff.
Oh, I thought I heard you say sheriff earlier.
Well, the sheriff's over too, but they're 2 separate.
I think she was just running together a list of everybody who was.
I talked to
So Karen, if we take a look at the folks that were here earlier today, the public defender and the state's attorney, they're both
living within their budget.
Right at 50%.
Yes, they are.
So with what they're requesting, do you feel like they would be able to live within that budget with their requests?
Not unless they had some vacancies that they chose not to fill.
So there currently is vacancies?
I don't know that. The only way I can see that they would be able to have the funds available to cover the new positions is if they did have some turnover and they could delay refilling some of the positions and fill those. I wouldn't believe that in the few months they have left in the year that they could scrape together $80,000. I mean, that's a whole year's salary for someone. So I don't know that.
2 half salaries. Because they were both looking for 2 positions.
They were each looking for a few positions for 4 months for the remainder of the year. The combination of those few positions in the public defender's office, I believe, came to $80,000 with benefits. They're usually very tightly budgeted in the salary category. Unless they have vacancies, and I wouldn't know that, that would be the only way I think that they could cover those new hires within their budget.
Wasn't the state's attorney slightly over last year?
They were a little bit over in salaries, but they were able to cover it from other places in their budget.
Non-salary.
Right. So we took care of it during cleanup at the end of the year.
Right. But I'm just saying that was before salary increase, things like that.
Right.
So they were a little bit over last year. In fact, it's going to be very difficult to cover unless they, like you said, they have those rational things that they have.
Right.
Just one more, our other revenues was down quite a bit. We can see the word other and it's
mostly related to Sun Hill.
The revenue?
Yeah.
Was?
And that's probably state funding timing.
The other revenues, if you look on page 5, that gives you a little bit more detail on the revenue. In that category, most of what's in there is the transfers in from 2 special funds to cover payroll tax related and pension expenditures in the corporate fund. We determine how that's done. So my accrual would bring it to match, but when we're doing the comparisons, we're doing actual to actual. So I do it on a quarterly basis. I would have done it, I should have done it at the end of May, and I've been a little, I'll be catching up.
Yeah, I was looking at charges for services, and that was, the majority of that was from Sun Hill. Yeah, the transfers, like I said, it's just when you decide to do it.
Yeah, and I do try to do that quarterly to transfer in.
Anything else? Thank you, Karen. Nothing?
And I just
going to say, Karen and I have talked about the adoption of using new online tools. And just to say, I costed it out. Those softwares that offer that cost the municipality about $20,000 to $100,000. So that's just something we did here. I did on my desk. So, going forward, when we develop these things, I don't want it to be redundant. But, Karen and I have talked about adopting that into use of the iPad devices, so you guys can see that information.
So these reports we should be able to have distributed to us via the iPads?
We'll have to.
And even
the information that I showed on the website, and that would be available for adoption. Or it's almost used as a subsystem, or a subledger or a subsystem of the accounting reporting.
What do you mean? What do you mean by subsystem?
For reporting, if anything, is an Excel sheet. Her Excel sheets are a subsystem of reporting.
Okay.
There's been talk over the last 4 or 5 years about possibly going to another finance system.
Correct.
Now, in 2009, we said no because that costed the county possibly $600 to $1.1 million, and obviously for some reasons, good reasons, we said no. So the most important part about accounting systems really is the reporting and what you can extract out of the information.
You're exactly right.
See, while that, what Duffy's new shows year-to-date actual, the comparison isn't there. I mean, it's in the analytical part. So we'll see if we can fit this into that.
I'm not saying if you fit into that, but even if we just post your spreadsheets somehow or another.
Well, if not for this, we can certainly make it available so you'll have it for your tablets. Right now, I've just been a little bit... Truthfully, I'm doing it the day before you're getting it. So now that Rashawn is here to save me from everything, hopefully you'll be able to get it when the agenda comes out and it will be available.
Even if it is the day before, like you're saying, if you get it from Melissa, so she could send me the emails that before we get a chance to look at it, before we get here. So even if it's morning, somebody wants to look at it. So
Steve, that will be when the finance department is trained on the board management software. That's why she's not aware of that. She'll be able to enter these as her PDF documents, even if it is the day before.
Right.
When you come into committee, instead of getting the paper copy, you'll be able to pull it up right where it is on that agenda line item. So.
Thank you. That's all. So even like I said, for the night before, if you want to take a look at it, we possibly could save a little time.
Thank you.
If we're moving on.
Yes.
Okay, under other new business, the question that I have is this. As the Finance Committee, what, if any, instructions have we given to folks about preparing the budget for next year vis-a-vis the use of the RTA funds? And if we haven't given them any instructions, let's do it. And you know what my position is.
We talked about that. That was part of our long meeting last month where what we want to focus on is a 5-year capital requirements budget where we are going to look at what our costs are over the next 5 years, what we anticipate, and look at that as a separate item from the actual revenue. So we're not going to allocate RPA money to anything. We're not going to allocate real estate tax money to anything. What we want to do is we want to see what our costs are and then look at the revenue sources in total each year and see how much of those projects we can get done each year. So I don't want to say that this year's budget is going to be allocating RPA money to sources. I want to look at our total capital projects needs and then say, okay, where are we going to get the money to do things?
So what you're saying is for the upcoming budget, we're going to have a 5-year plan to look at?
I'm open to have a better plan to look at it through this process.
That would be fabulous.
Now, this is just for capital at this point.
Yeah.
But
capital including roads, technology, and facilities.
yes,
So
everything.
all big stuff. Yes, it's charted out this year with projecting this number this year, that, what have you.
Yes. And then as part of the regular budgeting, it's to say that how much we're going to spend of those capital needs in this coming budget year, 14-15, that's going to be analysis that we do after we look at all the wants. So in other words, what roads can we possibly get done next year? And then basically after, if we want to push some of those back, we can. If we want to try to find more revenue, we can. So that's what I'm saying. Once we look at the total cost that we're looking at, then we can see how we can enhance our revenues or stay within whatever constraints we have.
Just to Margaret's point, we talked about this, I think, last month, but we are working, we don't have a final number because we're, Rashawn and...
Give her a minute.
And Karen are working on the budget interviews. We get all those interviews done. We're going to look at the whole of everything and make recommendations, but I expect there will be a more realistic number, maybe not so much. Well, this year's budget will be the number actually appropriation. The transportation plan is a plan. It's a big picture, high level, but the appropriations this year and going forward will have probably more realistic numbers of what we can realistically spend. Doesn't mean there's X amount of money allocated. There may be many more projects that are in the 5-year plan, and what that money goes to whatever projects are ready to go. So just hypothetically, if you have $100 million worth of projects and you have $30 or $40 million of allocation authority, you put that 30 or 40 million to those 100 million that are ready to go, and the others will just be pushed back to the next year. And when you get your next 5-year plan, it'll reflect the progress we've made and new projects that maybe come online or moving up quicker because of right-of-way acquisition. But we're going to hopefully, as we said last month, have a realistic plan of what we can spend on roads, what big ticket projects like Weber Road or 143rd Street or what have you on that 5-year radar, and even maybe looking a little bit off into the future, so that when we get to, say there's another project at year 7, when we're at year 4 now in our 5-year outlook, we're starting to budget to save so that we have those funds. But the budget we're hopefully going to recommend isn't going to slow down the road projects. It's going to keep the projects moving as quickly as possible for the ones that need to be done.
Yeah, but for instance, this coming budget year, I'm not sure we're going to have a tremendous amount of other capital projects ready to go in the 14-15 budget. But in the 15-16, we may have a lot more than we have money for. So
you should have come to capital.
So that's good. I should have. We're moving forward faster than I thought. I'd rather have it that way, but our earlier discussions were that we probably...
We're still working.
I know what our history has been, so... Steve?
We haven't discussed it, but I was at a budget hearing with the executives, the first one, and the question I had was, why don't we use actual numbers with our budget, like the sheriff being last year $3 million over what was allocated to him, and I was explaining why, and I get it. I get the reasoning why. I think that it's prudent on our part to use as close as we can to the numbers that we're going to have to spend, instead of just taking money at the end of the year and saying, I'm going to take it out of cash reserves and give it to balance everything out. You should be saying, all right, are you going to spend this much money? Put it in the budget for that much money. So we have actual numbers we're dealing with, instead of, you're never going to be exactly this, it's still, but you got to be close. And so I'm just throwing it out that, I don't think it's the right move to have any line item being so grossly over in a budget when we know that the department can't make it on the money we're giving.
We haven't seen that. I haven't seen the sheriff's request. We're just starting the budget process. So
I know, I'm just throwing it out now because we talked about it in depth, some time ago when we were going over the levy stuff. And as long as we're on this process, why don't I'm saying we should start right out of the get-go saying we should plan on using the actual dollar amounts as close as we can get for all the line items, even though that reduces our reserves.
The only thing I'll say, Steve did come to one of the earlier meetings. He thought it was a committee meeting, so I appreciate it. It was there's private meetings we're doing with the departments. But, you know, in the past, we did budget for some of the reserves use to balance the budget, and that was fine. One year, there was a lot of criticism of using cash reserves, even though historically when we used the cash reserves, it was really a placeholder for the revenues that were yet to come in. So, I don't know, Steve, if you're aware of that history, but there was some very vocal opposition to using cash reserves even as a placeholder, even though we never used it for the budget. So I guess sometimes you're good if you use it, you're not good if you use it, but we are using cash reserve this year to buy the First Midwest building, so that's as we talked about previous meetings, that's depleting our cash reserves closer to the bottom of our cash reserve policy.
What we've been stuck with most of the time is the fact that there's not enough revenue to cover the actual expenses that the sheriff is probably going to...
Correct, and what I was saying, if you have to pay those expenses, and you get the money from cash reserves, so it's more prudent to show that where you're getting, right on the get-go, say, we're going to give them this much money, and show our cash reserves right on the get-go.
I think, Steve, I think one of the things we really have to be very cautious in taking on that philosophy is it's revenue expense, okay? If our revenue is not coming in to cover all those expenses, and they went over their expenses, we can't just sit there and go, especially when it comes to salaries, sit here and say, we're going to continue to give that money, because that doesn't go away. And so to go in and say we're going to deplete cash reserves every year, you're just going to keep piling it on and piling it on.
Well, the idea is that...
I understand what the idea is.
You're going to spend it anyway, so we're not giving a true statement of the budget the way we're doing it.
Not necessarily, okay? And if you don't have the revenues to cover it...
Then you don't spend the money, or you figure a way of...
There you go.
Getting the money.
They don't spend the money.
That's the
I
thought that was before. That's the bottom line. They can't go over the budget.
That becomes a different way of dealing with it.
That entails possibly pink slips for some people.
Steve, you're hitting a different spot there. You're hitting a different solution to the problem.
But I'm trying to...
You don't want to go in and say, we're going to give you this amount of money. Because you don't want to cover up... One of us has to talk and one of us has to...
I don't want to cover up the problem by saying there is no problem and we're flush when we're not. I'd rather say there's a problem, we have to address it. I don't want to hide the problem. That's what I think we're doing.
I don't think anybody's hiding anything.
Well, if you say that you're going to be $3 million, we know we're going to be $3 million short of $4 million this year. And
you don't now use cash reserves to fund it. What happens when you go 5 years from now, Steve, and there's no cash reserves because you've taken it all out and now you're running a deficit? We're going to be in the same position as the state of Illinois. And we don't want to be there.
No, but how do you...
So if you don't go in and set the budget like that, you have to set the budget with what your expenses and revenues are, period. And if, to your point, we have to hand out pink slips, so be it. That's what they're going to have to do. But we're not going to go in and provide more revenue to these folks just to spend. You can't do that.
If you know they can't live within their budget that we're giving them, we have to give them more, or we have to have a discussion with them, and they have to figure out how to handle it. I mean, we just can't keep being short at the end of the year and say, oh, okay, we're $3 million short, because the year before we were $2 million short, then $3 million, this year's probably $4 million, and we're not showing that. That's all I'm saying.
No, you have a very valid point. The problem we've had over the last 4 or 5 years is we didn't have the revenue by our choice, by some of our choice at least. We didn't have the revenue to fund those shortfalls. So I think in the future we need to consider increasing our revenue source to cover some of these budget requirements. That's the only way we're going to be able to do that, because our cash can't...
That's one thing about some of the spending too. You know, the department heads can cut some of the spending.
Yeah.
That's what they were supposed to.
That's why we're not giving them the total amount, Steve.
We expect them to live within the budget we give them.
Yeah, well,
over the years.
I guess if before, we could take
Motion to adjourn.
They have to do that.
Okay, motion to adjourn by Mayor, second by Adam, all in favor?
Aye.
And your point is well taken. We just